Okay. Well, um, as we had just been discussing before the recorder was turned on, we had been discussing that that there was restlessness and conceit, but that there are other fetters which I don't talk about very much, and that is the fetter number 6 and 7, which are actually quite well bound together. Now, in the Pali, um, the word is Aruparaga and Ruparaga. Ruparaga and Aruparaga. Now, Ruparaga, the word raga in this case, uh, is kind of like a special intensity way of grasping or clinging. In fact, Ruparaga could be uh, the word raga, rupa here, is very characteristic because what it means is physical things, real things. For instance, a Buddha statue in Thailand is referred to as a Buddha rupa. In fact, I think everywhere, all over. Um, so the rupa means a physical representation, but it also means all of reality too. But it doesn't mean all of reality in the sense of the Dhamma, but it means you could go for it in the sense of life. So Rupa Raga actually means humans clinging, not just humans, but clinging to life, wanting to stay alive. That this clinging to life that is there is also a way of looking at directly the self-preservation instinct itself, because that's the job of the self-preservation instinct. It's also the most primary instinct that we have, and that is to stay alive. And it also manages that part of the brain that will take over the breathing automatically. There's an old Zen koan about that, and by the way, and that is breathe in, breathe out. If you forget to do that, then there is nowhere else to go. All right, but in fact, we don't forget to do it in the sense that something deep inside, even while we're asleep, keeps us breathing, keeps the heartbeat going, keeps things steady. Um, and while it's easy to have a mechanical understanding of this, in the sense of, yeah, the chest just moves in and out, and um, the heart just beats, and that the heart itself is doing all of the work that's needed to be done for the knowledge of a heartbeat. That all the brain has to do is send an electrical signal. And that's all it does. So to speed up or slow down the heart, it sends very, very few signals. But the control center is in the mind, and that's when things get really, really complicated in the sense of this instinctual system that's built right into the DNA, wanting to keep it together, is maintain the homeostasis, etc., like that. And so we recognize that when we there is more to be done than just the instinctual level, leaving the instincts as merely instincts, and we know that they're instincts, and we let the instincts play their own role, then everything is great. But the problem is that when we don't think things through, that we don't use the adult part of our mind, and we let the instincts take over and do things that are beyond their capability, beyond their abilities to operate, This is why we've talked about it in the sense of the automatic pilot for an airplane captain. He sets his own automatic pilot, and sure, the plane can stay homeostasis for a while until it runs into a mountain or another plane or something that has to that's much more here now oriented. In other words, the plane knows how to apply itself in regard to the autopilot because that's been programmed in over time. They've made a few changes here and there, but they've known how to do automatic pilots for many, many years. So you can think of then as our instincts as operating that same way as everything is coming out of the deep past. Our self-preservation instinct was there 1,000,000 years ago. And it was there 2,000,000 years ago. That there's something basically deeply buried inside the human psyche about staying alive. And that's where, as a secondary situation, we have conceit and we have restlessness. And they're interrelated in the following way. One is that they both take the same new chemical mix. One of them is designed in the sense of, I don't feel secure now, let me go do something, get something accomplished, fix some task. And that's the restless side of it. On the conceit side of it, it is, oh, we've got to do something to prevent attack because we see each other as dangerous. We don't see each other as friendly. And we're trained that way from childhood. That if I'm really having a bad moment and have a tantrum, the last thing I need is for mom to have her own tantrum right there at the same time. Because now not only am I feeling bad, I'm now feeling afraid because mom's going to hit me. So when we're really young children, these things get mixed together because the child is having a tantrum, which means I really need that box of cereal, or I really need my cell phone right now, which is one we've seen here, even though the battery is dead. Funny how whenever we leave the house, no, that's not true. Let's not go into that direction because she plays games too. But anyway, when she, so we wind up with backup. So she's got access to 4 cell phones. But she's very polite to come ask me for mine, but normally she'll get mom's. So anyway, the point that we're making here is that if a child is having a tantrum because we want something, in other words, we're already in that state of, I got to do this, I got to have this. We're in a state of anxiety. We feel the need to do something, like to get that cell phone or whatever like that, is now being mixed with danger in the sense that now mom is coming into it. And so these things get imprinted and stored together as a package in the cerebellum. Interesting like that, isn't it? Quite amazing why these things get wrapped up like this. So what we're actually looking at, going back to now Dhammarato, is that the instinct itself of self-preservation that keeps us alive also is that the source for the other stuff, which we've just been talking about, anxiety, tension. And in fact, you can see that a lot of anxiety is not just get her done, but there's a leaky kind of fear underneath that anxiety that if I don't get her done, then something bad's going to happen. So you've got both sides of that. In a way, what we have now is 2 different forces inside the mind that are working as hard as they can against each other. Remember that story about the wagon in a ditch, and everybody's trying to push it to get out of the ditch, and, and they're all find a place to push on it. Well, this is the same kind of thing. And that gets us into this state of anxiety to where we feel that we've got to get her done, and if we don't, something terrible is going to happen. And this is coming out of that lust for life. So this is why people will allow this stuff to go down to even life and death situations. Old grudges that just will not die. Okay, we can't let this stuff go because it goes right to the heart of our identity of who we are. That if I lose that argument with this guy, I'm going to lose who I am. I cannot allow him to be right. If he's right, then I am him, and I don't want to be him. You can hear all of that kind of crazy kind of thought logic that goes on inside the mind with this. But there is that life force that drives us to keep us alive. And that is also involved with then the direct fear of death. This is one of the reasons why death is kind of taboo in the West. You don't want to talk about it. You want to send Granny to the hospital to die, and you want to send her there before she dies. You don't want to let her die in the bed. You want to send her to the hospital to do that. And in fact, in some states, if someone does die in the hospital, the family lose control over the corpse. That in fact, because of, let us call it, business understandings, the doctor will call the mortician before he calls the family. And so the mortician is there when the family comes. How convenient. They're there now. We'll take care of everything. All right. So death being taboo is because whenever we start to think of death, this old tension or anxiety or feelings of fear arise. This feeling of fear of death is so strong that it actually creates religions. Because the religions will tell you a very, very delicious story. Oh, you come join our group, you keep paying your fees, you keep doing the way and do what you're told to do, and somehow or another you're going to be able to escape death. Only nobody quite actually believes that 100%. Nobody really believes that at all. And so we're still, even though we're captured by and caught in the religion, especially if we were raised in that religion from childhood. And as you know, all of the leaders of the religions work very hard to have families so that they can have a new generation. They want the people to bring their children to Sunday school, and the people are happy to do that so that they can get rid of a burden for a while. So it all works like that to indoctrinate little children, which means that they want to implant those old fears and those old rules and whatever in the child at a very, very young age so that it becomes almost instinctual and gets laid down there in the form of sankaras. Or that is what we call this, the formations. In other words, and we actually use that word in that exact sense, that the child is forming his mind as he grows up. And that formation process is what the Buddha calls the sankara, that gradual building up that is actually circular. It's almost like a snowball that once it starts rolling down the hill in that direction, it merely picks up more snow, continues in the same direction. And so it has that kind of snowball effect. And so once a child, let's say, establishes a sense of fear and dread, then that child will have those experiences of fear and dread right up into adulthood unless they know how to pull that stuff out. Because we automatically make the huge mistake that, oh, the fear and dread that I am having right now is because he's attacking me. That gives us the idea of, in fact, it's a sutta number 63. I might have even mentioned this to you. And it's the story of, it's actually not the story that's important in this case. What it was is a young monk wanted the answer to a question. And in fact, we're discussing this very question right now. And the Buddha said, and then the young man said, unless you tell me the answers to my question, I'm going to disrobe. I'm not going to, I'm so confused. I got to get out of here. And the Buddha told him the story about being shot with an arrow, a poisonous arrow, shot right in the chest. Bang. And our friends see us that way. They see that we're hurting. So they call a physician, and the physician is there trying to get the arrow out, and we say, wait a minute, who shot me? Look, he shot me. Why did he shoot me? What was the reason? What was the rationale? Okay. And the Buddha then said, if we get caught up with how we got shot, who shot us, why they got shot, and all of that kind of court case kind of stuff, surely we're going to die before we get the answer. The better part is, and what the Buddha was actually helping this young man to understand is that he had a deep, deep need to know something, and it was really driving him nuts, killing him literally. But he was doing it to himself. And people get that way over religions. They call them fanatics. Okay? And that they're driven because they don't know how they feel. And they don't know the source of the feelings. They don't know and recognize what's going on. So, at this level of Dhammarato, wrong word, Ruparaga, this is at its worst case, is at the strap-on bomb time. Because there's another component that's built into it, and that is the other side of the coin, which is the one that's the most misunderstood of all. Because people, when they look at the Pali, they don't have the right definition of the word, okay? The next one is Aruparaga. Ruparaga we've been talking about. Aruparaga means not, in some case, Ruparaga. And what they've thought about is that it's Arupa raga, that the raga is still there, but it's a state that's wanting to desire a state of existence that is not based in physical reality. All right, the Christians would talk about it as after death. So before you die, it's Ruparaga. After you die, it's Aruparaga. All right. They also use it in that sense of people who are lusting for the four jhanas, where the Buddha is very clear, no, that's not Aruparaga, that's sensual desire. It's wanting to feel good, not wanting to change such a big thing as to leave the body, though there is in the fourth jhana, and this is where it comes from, the out-of-body experience. where the body begins to really change a lot. This is why you have stories about flying monks. It's because in his mind he's left his body and he's out flying. Or that the body gets very big, very tall. You feel like you're 60 feet in the air, some big, huge statue or whatever, and it seems like that it's just so far down, like a standing on the your eye point is from the position of a high-rise building. And as you look down, even the cars are just microscopic. Okay, so this is also a feeling, and it's kind of the same feeling as flying or floating. So that it's an expansive feeling to where all of the senses of the body have become very quiet, that you've been able to block all of that stuff out. And so now you're dealing with stuff that's really deep in the mind. In fact, what you could say at the fourth jhana is where we're actually capable of turning off the reptilian brain. But by doing that, we also turn off almost all sensory awareness. And that this is not a state that I know of that people lust for. So how could the Buddha go so far as to put this as one of the major fetters that has to be eliminated when very few Christians that I know of really lust for heaven? Everybody that I know of lusts to stay alive. Above all else, stay alive. The doctors really want you to stay alive because as long as they can keep you alive, they'll make money off of you. When they lose that battle, and they'll play it right to the end, getting rich all the way. But when they lose that end, now it's the mortician's turn to make money. While the whole family has been avoiding the whole thing. And so this gives rise to grief, by the way. How many times do you hear the idea or the story that I didn't really have a chance to say goodbye to Granny? Well, if Granny knows she's dying, she can say, hey, man, I'm dying. Don't take me to the hospital. Everybody come. I want to say goodbye. Let's have a funeral now. Let's get drunk and have a ball. I've actually been at one funeral like that. I think I might have mentioned it to you. Jean, 1997, 98, 1998. She was a spiritual person, and we began the spiritual journey as both lovers and eventually brothers and sisters way back when in the 1970s. What had happened is that I believe that she got hepatitis in India, and that's what she died from, because they kept giving, in her late in life, they kept giving her transfusions, and the transfusions began to bring more stuff in that she needed to deal with besides the hepatitis. And so the hospital and the insurance company decided to cut her off and let her know. Well, instead of taking that as a a death panel or a murder, she saw it as an opportunity. And so she had her funeral on Saturday, and on Tuesday she died. She had it that well timed, and wow, was it a big celebration. It was in the Redwood Forest, in one of those big camping places with these huge trees around. We had pizza and beer and musicians and many of the people who worked at the same place that she worked at. And many of the people from the hospital came, as well as a lot of other people. She attended the Unitarian Church, and so there were people like that there. Big crowd of people. Best funeral I've ever been to. And she was the star of the show. She was really laid out like a queen, except she was sitting up in a chair and enjoying the show. Now that's my kind of funeral. All right, but most in the West, they don't do that because they keep postponing death, pushing it off because of the fear of death. And they're not able then to take on the Aruparaga in the sense of, oh, now I'm going to lust for the afterlife. That's really funny that Christians, very, very few Christians are really ready to jump into the lion's den intentionally. Muslims are. They believe that stuff that strongly. But the Christians, they don't believe it anymore. It's almost like every Christian I know is a clothless atheist. Because they don't jump from I love this life and I'm clinging to it. And to know I'm willing to let this one go because I'm clinging to the next one. All right. So basically, there's another way of looking at a Ruparaga other than this kind of out of the body experience, a floating ghost, a spook, or whatever. Because I don't think anybody, after a few years of Halloween in the United States, want to become a ghost. It's not a big issue. But there is something, and that is if you look at Aruparaga in a different way, you say that, oh, what's really wanting to go is that I want to not have raga of any description, even an out-of-body kind. In other words, I want out of here. I want this to stop. I want this to be over. Now, at the ultimate sense, that means I actually want to die. This is time for it. Life is, or living in this body has become too much of a struggle. And I want to trade this model in, and I don't even care if I get a new one or not. So and that this is known throughout all of history. In the Greeks, they called it Thanatos. We can call it death wish. We can call it suicide. There comes a time when things are so bad that the wish for life is now being overtaken by the wish for death. If you're lucky. In that last moment, the letting go. If you're actually saying, oh, death, please, this is it. I thank you. Come. I'm ready to take my last breath. All right. So that's actually the release. They talk about this, in fact, in many, many different ways. It's a big favorite in Buddhism, is that last mind moment is highly determinative of what your next life will be if you believe that there's going to be a next life. But a better way of looking at it is, hey, let's have a really sweet checkout. Let's go out like Gene did. Let's go out with a party. But the problem with Aruparaga is that it's not that big last deal about death, but that it influences us on a regular basis throughout life also. When we get fed up with a job, that's the Aruparaga that comes in and manifests itself in order to take over my lust for, I want to keep this job because I am this job. This job is my identity. If I lose this job, I won't know who I am. And you know how much that happens to people. In fact, what working career I have had, much of it was done in contract work, which means that I didn't work for either the agency nor the employer, that the employer paid the agent and the agent paid me, and I never saw the agent, and I wasn't an employee of the employer. which gives contractors the idea that, oh, we belong to a different group. We belong to a group of contractors. And we have our own set of ethics and morals and that kind of stuff. But it's still an identity. So rather than saying, I'm a Hewlett-Packard employee, I would say I'm a Hewlett-Packard contractor. And so rather than going down the tunnel of any stories about that, we're talking about identity. And when are we willing to give up identity? For me, I remember what happened was that because of circumstances in life, after my grandfather died, we moved from Oklahoma to Rock Hill, from Rock Hill to Charlotte, from Charlotte to Fort Mill, from Fort Mill to Sherrall, from Sherrall to Abbeville, and from Abbeville to Dillon by the time I graduated high school. And I remember every time I had that feeling of, or not every time, when the first move that we had was kind of trepidation. And I didn't know what it was going to be. But after that, every time my folks tell me it's time to move, we're going to pack up and within 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever like that, we're out of here. That time that was left was such a relief. I am so glad to be out of this town. And that happened also when I got out of high school to go to college. Wow, was I so glad to get out of this place, okay? That's that Ruparaga, when we're willing to end something, to kill it, to let it go, to throw it out. And as you can imagine, if we did not have that opposite to Ruparaga, then we would cling even more tenaciously to everything, when in fact we live in a temporary world. Everything dies. So I was kind of lucky in that sense, because the other way of doing it without the Ruparaga, saying I'm willing to get out of here, I'm willing to let this place go, is for me to go kicking and screaming, I'm not leaving, I'm not going with you, family, I'm going to stay here, and create tantrums and suffering and all of that kind of stuff. So in fact, this Ruparaga is a counterbalance. If we do it wisely, it will be of great value to you to know that there is something inside of you that is quite willing to kill it.
So it sounds like it's a good thing in a way. Why is it considered a fetter?
Because of the ignorance that is associated with it. And that's why it causes so much trouble, all the way to, let us call it, untimely suicide. To where in Gene's case, that was kind of a timely suicide. It was time to go. There's another time. Let's say it like this. The monk has gotten really old. He's already had his 100th birthday celebration. He's got a couple of old-timers that know him and been with him for years, but they've gotten old too, and they've been attending him, and now he can't walk anymore, and he's become incontinent. The thing to do in modern times is that, well, we need to send this guy to the monks' hospital. But in the old days, there was no monks' hospital to send him to. And so if the monk then gets the attitude and the mindset, this is time to let it go. Let me prepare myself to die because I have become a burden to my two dearest friends. Because that's the old tradition, is that the monks, when they can't take care of themselves anymore, then they find a way of sort of sitting down and not ever getting up. In fact, I have come to understand there's one very famous one, but now I know that there's monks like this all over Thailand, but they're not known well. They're almost too sacred and too important to let out, and so they're kind of kept secreted away. But the one in the corner of the town, they have him sitting out publicly. And he's been dead and sitting there for 300 years or so, so I hear. And his flesh is still supple. He just sit down and just let it go. When the death wish will then overtake the life force. So there's something buried deep within that self-preservation instinct is kind of strange because of all of the hundreds of trillions of life forms that have been on the planet Earth. None of them had a life force or a self-preservation instinct that was completely effective. Nobody. Eventually, the Thanatos, the death wish, the let her go, comes out and wins. It'll ultimately always win. And that the circumstances are then timely based upon when Thanatos will kick in. Because now that you know about it, you'll know how to manage it, that you'll watch for it, you'll be ready for it. It's part of the preparation for death. Because becoming prepared for death is one of the best ways I know of freedom to live. You'll really learn to live when you're really ready to die.
What do you think about this story? This actually happened. This woman knew she was getting early signs of dementia that would lead to Alzheimer's. So, and this is, I think she lives in a place where, assisted suicide is not allowed. So she ordered the special drugs from Mexico. She had a funeral, kind of like a party, kind of like your friend, to say goodbye. And then, she took the drugs before completely losing her mind to dementia. Is that skillful?
Yes, of course. And if you want to know the answer to that beyond me, go ask any of the people who were at her funeral, and they'll become teary-eyed. Yes, that is definitely a skillful way to go. Highly recommended. As opposed to being afraid of death, going completely insane, lost all of memory, and there's nothing left but the fear of death. And she spends a few years that way. Which is the more noble way? To go out with a party? Or to go out miserable? My grandmother is a good example, by the way, of that. She died at the age of 101, but she was deathly afraid of death, literally. And the rationale that she had is that she hadn't been to church in so many years because she was an old lady. Old ladies get too old to go to church. But that didn't stop her from feeling bad about it. So because she hadn't been to church in 10 years, she thought she, wasn't going to have the right kind of floorboards in her mansion or something. I don't know what her problem was. But she did not go out well, and that was a tragedy. In fact, she died of morphine overdose because it was Christmas and the doctors went home and nobody was monitoring the morphine to find out that she was not getting enough oxygen in the, that her chest was too relaxed. And in that regard, I would say that that would probably have been the easiest way out. But it was all about breathing. It's very, very interesting like that, that the life force and all of that kind of stuff, including the word, for instance, spirit. Look at the word expire. What does the word expire mean? It actually means to breathe out. But what do we use it for? We use it for death. The death is a breathing out. It's a letting go. It's an exhale. Get it out. Get rid of it, including life itself. So, I want to tell you now a happy little song. The first time I ran across it was in the Coneheads, a movie in the 1980s, but that they were referencing a Jimmy Durrante song from the 1930s. And I don't remember the actual name of it, but the line goes like this: Have you ever had the feeling that you wanted to go, and then you had the feeling that you wanted to stay? Come, go, go, stay. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. I go. And when I heard that thing the first time, I didn't quite understand it, but later I got it. That is in fact the dance that we are in between the relationship between Ruparaga and Aruparaga. Do I come? Do I go? Do I stay? Do I go? If you recognize that you've got these two forces in there, that way you can come to a deeper, let us say, more wise understanding of the processes that's happening within you, so that you can come to a more noble, rational decision. Because we get into those conflicts of going and staying and staying and going. I want out of here. I want to stay, etc., like that. Because by staying, we keep our identity of this is who I am. By going, we kind of lose that. So there's kind of a balance or a tipping point in there in the sense of if what I've got now is not worth having to the point that I'm willing to let it go. And this is why people have suicides. People literally talk themselves into suicide because they're talking themselves into things that are too bad right now to put up with.
Also, do you think they believe that at death, it's just extinguishing of everything? Like, for example, there is a statistic that there is a high suicide rate among veterinarians, and it's easy for them because they have access to the drugs, and also they're probably not religious, and something, I don't know, their job is too stressful, emotionally difficult, and that leads to a high suicide rate. Do you think
Which group are you talking about? I didn't catch the word.
veterinarians, veterinary doctors, like,
Veterinarian doctors, yes,
mhm.
uh-huh.
And do you feel like this belief that at death it's just everything stops, that leads in a way to a high rate of suicides, because you're kind of like, okay, I just want to stop the suffering and get out?
Well, first off, your question has an underlying moral statement to it. So let's begin to look at things from, rather than a moral statement, let's look at it from a reality position. That is more noble, in fact, to stay with reality, and in that regard, it's actually more noble. But within Christianity, for instance, which is very much a part of our culture, um, an example of it is right to life, the right to lifers. Okay. Why do we believe that things have a right to life in the face of the fact that everything dies? And we can look at it from the position of murder, and we could even look at it in the sense of warfare or tribal conflicts, from the sense of the incoming. But if we look at it strictly from one's own personal point of view, if things are in fact bad enough for me to let go, then that's what's going to happen. And by the way, getting shot in the chest by an arrow by my favorite enemy is probably going to kick me into a Ruparaga Thanatos death wish and say now's the time to go. Some will not. Some will grab hold of that arrow and pull it out and stagger up and grab their sword and go off back into battle again. That makes for a good movie. But it doesn't happen real life often. Mostly when you get shot in the chest with an arrow, you lay down and you die. So it's the same thing. We just have the time compacted. But normally what happens is that we get prepared for death over a longer period of time. And that if we do it unwisely, then we start weighing it in the direction of it is better to die than it is to stay alive and either walk away from my mess. Because in fact, that's something a lot of people don't understand, that a plane ticket is oftentimes as big a death experience because you get out of town. You don't necessarily have to get out of life. You can just get out of this town because you're going to leave it all behind. That was one of the things that I learned very young, and yet many, many people, I would say, in fact, the majority of the people on Earth do not leave the locality that they were born in. Very few people spend time in more than 10 or 20 countries. It's a kind of a unique, and it's a wildly eye-opening experience that people have. And that this is one of the examples of that. That in that regard, when people see that things are going really, really, really badly right now, but they don't even see that they've got an option of a plane ticket. And so they will do whatever they need. Now, we can also look at why would veterinarians, as a profession, why would they do that? Well,
Because euthanize animals a lot. They deal with death a lot, and they kind of more used to it.
I don't think if I was a veterinarian that I would be kind of veterinarian whose primary job was as a pre-mortician.
Yeah,
Yes, that's right.
unfortunately, it happens a lot.
Okay. So I can see that because they're dealing with death a lot. That was exactly the point that I was making. Even if they didn't do any of the putting down, still they would have a very, very high mortality rate. One, because a lot of owners will not bring an animal to the vet until it's too late. And therefore they have to be put down. The only option is for that animal to lay there in the animal hospital and die. And we have the idea that the animal is suffering and doesn't have a way. Now the question is that every animal that I know of would rather lay and suffer because their death wish, their Thanatos, hasn't kicked in yet. And therefore it is a kind of a murder. That it's better to let the animal suffer because that's what the animal wants to do. And of course, if we don't know the answer to that, then why would we assume, oh, it's my job to put this animal out of suffering? And so I can imagine that that because of the dealing with death and because of the loosening of the boundaries between Ruparaga and Aruparaga, the life and death ish, and also the moral rot that would happen to a physician, knowing that oftentimes he's putting an animal to death before that animal needs to die. An example of that would be severe bodily injuries, like a broken arm that's just so tore up. Well, all you need is a sling and time, and that dog would rather run around. In fact, you might even find a little roller for him to roll that one leg on, and he'll be great. He'd be good to go. I've seen dogs do that. But many times, especially as I was younger, if a dog got beaten or hit by a car so that he had a shoulder injury or a broken leg, they'd put him down. And the doctors know that. They're medical doctors also, and so they know that many of the put downs that they're doing is wrong. And so now they have to live with that kind of guilt. And so that will add to the tipping of the scales towards the suicide of the veterinarians. I imagine that there's other factors involved, but that looks like the big one, the issue of the morality. I wouldn't want to do it. There are so many jobs that I just would not want to do. One of them is being a judge. I would not. I mean, couldn't do that job. Could not be a judge. But this is one of those situations. Now, there's also the issue of cultural support. And an example of that would be Japan, where the suicide rate there is pretty high. I don't know if it's the highest in the world, but they've got social norms so that if a politician fails, or if a warrior fails, or if even a young boy fails at love, you can see how it gets really, really messed up with this idea of the easy way out. Where in fact, the actual issue is not being very well laid out. Going back to my childhood, I really didn't have any choice when my family moved. But I found a way to like it. So if things change for you, you can find a way of liking that, because you're not going to be able to keep your job. Someday or another, you're going to lose it. I don't even know what your job is, and it doesn't matter, because it's temporary. And if you identify with it and you lose it, then you'll feel bad. Look how many people feel really, really bad that has been associated with Donald Trump over the past 2 years. Wow, so much bad feeling, because they were attached to a job. Then they were attached to, do I do the right thing, or do I do what I'm told to do? And they wind up eventually doing the wrong thing, feeling so bad about it that then they started to do the right thing, and then they got fired. So they did all of the wrong things and did the worst possible way of doing it. Or possibly the right way of done it in the first place is, no, Donald, I'm not. Goodbye, I quit. But people won't do that because they're attached to those jobs, especially when they're high political, powerful positions. And I am the Secretary of State. Me, Secretary of State, and people get into that. Donald Trump does that too. In fact, he does it right out loud. Well, I'm the president of the United States. Which is really, really ingraining himself into, I own this. This is me. And so that means that he's setting himself for a major disaster when it's taken away from him. And it's going to be taken away from him either by a clock or by the voters or by the Congress or something or another. He's going to lose it no matter what. And so if we know that and we're prepared for it, then when that time comes, our new response is, yippee-ki-yo-ki-yay! I'm out of here. Because it's going to happen, and it's going to happen in the job, it's going to happen in relationships, and it's going to happen with the body. It's going to happen at the time of death. Our choice is, are we going to continue to attach to clinging to life, clinging to existence, clinging to the way things are, clinging to our identities? Are we going to let it go? In fact, we need some Ruparaga involved with the Dhamma all along to help us to make the changes that we need to make, to come out of the mind that's hindered, to be able to come back to the here and now over and over again in a way that is Ruparaga saying, get out, go, enough, out of here. And so this is Ruparaga and Aruparaga that are in a dance. The question is it going to be an ignorant dance, or is it going to be a very, very wise, mindful knowing that these two forces are in there and that Ruparaga is going to win?
So they are fetters when you're not looking at them skillfully, but they can be positive
liberating
things if you're looking at them skillfully.
Yes.
I see.
Actually, they're neither one. The fetter still is ignorance. Ignorance is really the fetter. But the Ruparaga and Aruparaga are life forces that are so deep, so buried, that it's good to put them on this list of fetters so that they can be seen that way, something to be opened up, inspected, understood, figured out, recognized in the sense of, look how society fails at not managing these two things wisely. And so that you can figure out how will it be for you to manage your own death wisely. Because you've got time now, plan well. And I'm not talking about the event, I'm talking about the mind states. Because that's what's important, not the event itself, but the mind state that we're in. Because if you can get the right mind state for the acceptance of death, then we've got a good mind state that we can use all the time. That's a really, really powerful tool. And sometimes we ask Buddhist students, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? Well, what is the worst thing that can happen? And I'm thinking, well, I'm not sure.
Not death.
Well, no, the worst thing that it can happen is that I think that there are worse things to happen. That's the worst thing that can happen. The death itself, I cannot see that as the worst thing that can happen. But in the beginning of the practice, we see death itself as the worst thing. Okay, well, if I can get ready for death, if I'm ready for that, if I'm no longer afraid of dying, if I am no longer afraid of death itself, then also that means that I am free to live. And so that's the real freedom. It comes as one of the ways of looking at, that's the reason why it's a fetter, is because the release from that is freedom. It's no longer a bondage. So long as that ignorance is wrapped up in the Ruparaga and the Aruparaga, it's a bondage. It's a fetter.
So, let's say someone comes to you and they're not a Buddhist. and they say, my problem is I think about death all the time. I'm scared. I don't know what's gonna happen. Um, what would your short advice be? I know the long advice would be, going over everything we went over so far, but
Hmm. Well, a little shock therapy might work. So the question is, are you actually suicidal? You're actually going to do it now?
not that they actually have a fear of death because it's big unknown to them.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So this is the opposite side of the coin. All
Right.
right. All right. Okay. I like the other one. I'd rather you ask me the question, well, what if somebody comes and they're really on the verge of suicide? I'm going to get my cat pistol out and tell them it's a loaded gun, and I'm going to say, do it now. Let me see you do it. I want to watch. Let me get my video. This is going to be great stuff from YouTube.
In Japan, there is a monk that has seminars where you come in and you do a pretend death. You actually lie in the coffin, uh, you know, you write your letters to your loved ones, and people, it's like a shock therapy for people. They no longer want to commit suicide.
Yes, exactly. So, anyway, back to your question. You've got people that are terrified of death. Um, then the important thing at that level is to start working with feelings. How do you feel? What do you mean by being terrified? If you deep breathe, does the feeling of death? Okay, and then you begin to operate with it as kind of the same way you would with any phobia. Psychotherapists have gotten phobias down pretty well. They know how to do slow introductions so that people who are afraid of spiders wind up with spiders on their hands. Non poisonous spiders. People who are afraid of snakes wind up having snakes on their lap if it's a good therapist. Fear of death, we've got a little issue here. But it has to be approached in the same way, and that's literally what we're talking about, approach. In the sense of, well, imagine what it's like to be dead. And if they start screaming and saying, oh, I'm terrified, and then I say, well, that sounds more like hell than death. I thought you were afraid of death. Are you afraid of death or are you afraid of hell? And so we have to start, cutting things up and dividing them out and figure out what's going on. That's the way to deal with it. If someone is afraid of death, we actually have to identify the feelings, find out, is it fear of actual death, which is nothing, or is it a fear of something that's going to happen, like retributions for bad actions, which was where my grandmother was. Only she was way up there at the 99.99 percentile, thinking that she's losing ground fast. Very strange like that. I guess is the zealots, though, the ones who are able to maintain their religion the best, are the ones who are actually the most afraid of the retribution after death. And so, like my grandmother, is only the most devoted Christians that wind up being the most terrified of death. To where people who are happy sinners, they say, I'll take my chances. In fact, the way that heaven is normally described, it doesn't sound like much of a place to go.
Unless it's the one where all the dogs you had in your life come to you, all your pets, you know. I like that version.
Yes, all dogs go to heaven. That was a movie out of the 90s, I think. Um, that comes because we feel good with our pets. So you don't have to wait for heaven But that's the issue with all of this is that it's always something out into the future. It's not something here now, where the real dog and the real pleasure from the real dog is right here, right now. They see him, he's right behind you. And he looks like he's enjoying himself too. So, um, did that answer your question about how to handle people who come with the fear of death? To get
Yes.
them to, yeah, to examine it, to feel the body's feelings. When you think about death, um, the next thing would be to go to actually do a funeral, do funeral shopping. In fact, go to a mortician, find out the next funerals he's got planned, and go to them all. That actually had something to do with it. It does. When I was a monk, it seems that dealing with death was very, very common. A lot of, how to say it, there were so many Asian refugees in the state of North Carolina with only 40 monks that the death rate was high enough so that many of the weekends, not every weekend, but many of the weekends, we had to start planning on Friday night which monks were going to go where. And it was all coordinated through Mahasamsak at our temple, which meant that our group was the one who was the most divided up. That we were always the odd man out for every different funeral that was in town. That we rarely got to go. Only we did the only time that we did funerals together was when the funeral home was our own local funeral home, which was common enough, or several different ones. And also it's a tradition that a monk rides with the body when it's in moving. And so normally the tradition is that you have some sort of indoor um, ceremony with talking and whatnot. Then you all get into your automobiles and you go someplace like either a crematorium or a cemetery. All right, so that ride between is something that a monk should go along. I wound up doing that on almost every one. It was like I chose that job, and everybody said, "Yep, you can have it." And so I wound up getting to know many of the drivers from the various funeral homes. I had very interesting conversations with them about it. So that actually does play into it. Being at a lot of funerals, being around death a lot, we actually of all of the chants that I memorized, one of the ones that I remember is one of the funeral chants. Anicca Vata Sankara Upatawa Udamano Tesa Jata Nejante Tesa Vipassano Sukho, and then you push the button. And normally you have the button of the hand of the son of the man who's dying or someone like that. Mostly it would be the eldest son, and you hold his hand and you push that button while we say that last prayer. And the last words, by the way, is death is the highest peace, sukho, happiness, bliss, joy. Death is the best one of all. You'll be so happy when you're dead.
So that's interesting. If those people hear that prayer and they understand the meaning, that's what my question is. Like, wouldn't that lead to more untimely suicides? If you believe death is the highest peace, there is some trouble in your life, you don't really feel like dealing with it.
Well, here's the thing. For the one way of looking at it is it's not the dead person at this particular point in time that we're working with. It's the family member who is in grief and telling them that their dearly departed is actually in peace now.
Right.
You see, in Christianity, half of the people say maybe he's not in peace, maybe he's roasting. Okay, but within Buddhism, death being the highest peace is actually death is even better than heaven. What a bore! 10,000 years of the same harp music. Give me a break. I'm on out of here. So death is in fact the highest peace. It's all over. To have it finished is the best ending. To go out with a celebration and a bang. So that does fit in, especially in the sense that this is consolation. Most of the people, most of their lives within Buddhism are not going around listening to funeral prayers, nor pushing the buttons to cremate their own father.
But you know how, like when Buddha was teaching, he actually, the belief at the time in that region was that you actually want to stop the cycle of reincarnation, aka, the highest peace is just stop and death. So if you look at it from that perspective, kind of there's more value to death than there is to life.
Well, one of the ways is to understand, or one of the ways to start this question is to understand the distinction between metaphorical language and actual language, especially in the sense of the first word is samsara. You've heard the word samsara, okay? That's the wheel of suffering. This is samsara. It's in the mind. You can also say it rebirth. Every time somebody thinks of death and becomes afraid of death, that's a rebirth of this person who is afraid of death. And that every human being takes on different personality states from moment to moment, time to time, and then they become that thing, and then that dies away with a new feeling and they become something new. And so you wind up being a crowd. This is why the end goal of the Eightfold Noble Path is known to be right unification of mind. Is that we're always there because we have the ability to manage feelings. We can feel the way that we want to rather than having every new feeling that arises create a new existence momentarily. Okay? That is what the Buddha has been always teaching, but it did not fit in with the belief systems of many of the new students who would come to him that still understood samsara to be over many, many lifetimes. And even the word lifetime can be the lifetime of that thought process, the lifetime of that individual in that short interval of time while he's in an emotional state. This is the better way of looking at it. And so also rebirth is not the rebirth after death. And so here's something very interesting. There is full-blown reincarnation that never had an end and it never had a beginning. But it does have the law of karma so that the new life is going to be determined upon the actions of the past life on and on and on and on and on and on forever in both directions. This is Brahmanism. It was only the Buddha who brought in the concept of the idea in at the time was the idea of ending the wheel of samsara. But the ending of the wheel of samsara, now we have to work with two different systems. One of them is a magical system, and the other one is an actual system. Both of them using the same language, both of them pointing out the same details, and both of them coming to the same conclusions, except that one of them is a magical system that has over long periods of time, and that the here now